Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Mind interview series where we have conversations with real people like you who are doing their best to be their best every single day. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Kelly Ann Parker, who's an incredible native New Yorker. It's hard to find those these days, entrepreneur and founder coach, who's going to be talking to us about how she practices mental fitness and what her journey has looked like. So, with that, I'd like to thank you, Kelly, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Lissy. I love this topic and audience, and I'm super pumped to get into it today.
All right. So with that, let's do this thing. So what's your story? Like what brought you here on this planet today?
I love that. So I am a native New Yorker. I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in South Brooklyn specifically. And I was a decent student growing up. I think I really struggled in certain areas in school, specifically math and science. And I was um, the first college graduate in my immediate family, and I'm the oldest. So my parents didn't go to school, so it was a huge responsibility for me to like kind of
Oh,
pave that way for myself and my siblings. And school wasn't always my thing, right? So um, I was able to, get by and excel in certain areas, but really fail in others. And I think that's what I learned about myself and why entrepreneurship became the easiest match because my first job right out of college was in startups. And I
wow.
learned very quickly that you could be really good at every day being chaos and working on so many different things. And it wasn't like the education system where you have to be an expert in all these different subject matters. So I really started to excel and find that why and that purpose in building companies and being in startups. Yeah, so super pumped that I get to talk about that journey. And outside of work, I would say, I still have that entrepreneur spirit where I go after big goals and want to kind of give back to the universe. So I in the last year I ran the New York City Marathon. Involved in a few run clubs. I volunteer for organizations that I'm passionate about, and have the opportunity to leave New York and travel a bit, but also really always finding new restaurants and things to do here in my hometown.
So good. I have to ask, do you have a favorite restaurant in New York?
Yes. I have a few based on genres. I actually, and kind of seasons, because I think New York is a very season oriented place. And right now we're flirting with soup season, right? It's been 80 degrees in
Yeah.
October. But I would say some of my favorite restaurants are actually local to South Brooklyn. So places like Roll and Roaster and Brennan and Carr and things that you wouldn't really see on the traditional New York list. And then, of course, pizza, right? I love Spumoni Gardens and Giuliana's and Joe's. But yeah, I'm always happy with a slice on the road.
Well, you're in good company here. I feel the same. My dad used to say there's no such thing as bad pizza. It's just good and better. And I feel like in New York City, that's pretty much true. So love the Rex. Amazing. So let's actually dive in a little bit more to your story. I mean, I'd love to hear a bit more about this business that you built. And what was like the moment you decided, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing? And what was that like?
Yeah. So I was in startups for many years. And in one of the startups that I worked at, we would send gifts. Our clients were office managers, and we would often send gifts to them when, whether it was their birthday or they were happy with service or not happy with service. And it was really a relationship builder. And I learned whenever I did something personalized and thoughtful about the person, right? Like if they were going on vacation, um, I would, put together a gift bag of like a towel, sunscreen, Polaroid, and be like, have the best trip, right? But if I sent something quick and easy, like, a dozen donuts, I would never get a thank you. It was just always like, oh, that was a nice gesture, right? So whenever I did something personalized and really about the person, I knew it was building rapport and so on. So I tested this out for like a year in my current role, and then started interviewing them about what gifting companies they use. And I took the idea and made it a business. So I created a corporate gifting company based on all their feedback. And I was able to bootstrap it. I had $5,000 to my name the day I started my business, but I did have that one kind of safety of knowing if I failed, I was offered my job back. I had spoken to the CEO the day I made the decision, and that was kind of my safety net. And I never had to make that call. I did call him when we were getting close to exit, but I never had to say, like, hey, I need my job back. And that really came from grit and determination of, like, hey, I really want to be an entrepreneur and I want to make this work. So I started that business and it grew. And in 2020, it was acquired by Urban Stems, which is a Series C floral and gift provider here in the US. So they're kind of a household name in the gifting space. And January 1st of 2022, I took my full exit. Um, and I always say I had my eat, pray, love year, which we have spoken about before. Um, and from there, it just opened so many other doors for me, right? Of having that journey of launching a business, growing it, and exiting it.
I can only imagine. And I guess like what I'd love to have you spend a little more time on is like, what did your mental fitness look like throughout this journey? Maybe like starting with right before you decided to, take this leap. I know it sounded like it was obviously like quite a process of a year of getting feedback to exit.
Yeah, that's so interesting because looking back now, it feels like such a different lifetime ago. But when I was working in startups, I definitely had that Silicon Alley lifestyle of being in New York City, living in Manhattan. I was excelling at work, so I was truly crushing all of my revenue numbers and never missing a happy hour and going out. And I think I lived in my apartment a few years, and I think I used the stove like twice. So I was very much living a fast, like build at all costs kind of lifestyle, and really neglecting like my physical and mental health at that point of like, hey, work is work, and then work hard, play hard type of mentality. And all of that shifted once I became a founder. I always say that I worked harder for the startup that I worked at previously than I ever did for myself, and that's really telling. Because when I worked for myself, and I still work for myself, I'm able to incorporate so many more of those, good for you wellness activities that are part of my success today, and were then, you know, everything from incorporating like cooking all of my meals and going for walks. And, I don't drink alcohol during the week. That's a primary thing that I don't do. I barely drink alcohol at work events too. These were all practices that were part of my daily routine and now are so significantly not. So I really did a full 180 of my lifestyle changes in that. Um, and I would say that I became more mindful, not just in my business relationships and personal relationships, but how I give back my time. And where it's spent now is so significantly different than what it was when I first started my business.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that a bit more in a second, but do you have any anecdotes or moments that you think were significant when it comes to your mental fitness story, either of like the good or the hard?
Yeah, there's definitely like, you know, lows and highs, right, of being a founder. And I think this is one of the things that is kind of like romanticized of like being your own boss or being an entrepreneur is like the lows are so significantly low. And there were so many times where the stress was so overwhelming. And, when you're dealing with such low resources financially, anything could break your business. And I'll give one example. I remember a time where um, we were packing shipping boxes for an event, and over $10,000 of our gifts broke in the boxes in export being delivered on a plane. And it truly could have knocked out the whole business of replacing that inventory and
Yeah.
going through that process and saving face with the client. And I just remember, doing what was right in the moment and not looking at the bill and the cost and just being like, okay, I'll figure it out when the bill comes. But that type of stress, like where you have to win because you have to keep a roof over your head. And, I think it puts you have two options. You either, find a way or you don't. Right. So I think that type of stress is something that not everyone could handle, and what mediums you use to handle that type of stress are really important, right? And what tools you have in your tool belt to combat that are
Yeah.
critical.
No, totally. And I think it brings me to my next question, which is like, what are those tools? Like, what are one to three things that you use now? You could talk about things that you used in that. I mean, I'm curious what you did in that moment, but like, that help you practice mental fitness. And for those who, haven't listened to this as much, mental fitness is the practice of doing these like active exercises that help you work on your mind to deal with your ups and downs. So I say deal with your ups because it's not just about, dealing with stress. It's also about recognizing the good. But yeah, it'd be great to hear what these tools have been for you, Kelly.
Yeah. So the first is I have a morning routine, and this is something I used to hate listening to on podcasts. The most successful people have morning routines and so on. And then I worked with a coach who said to me and was like, Kelly, it doesn't mean that you have to, get up at 4 a.m. and do X, Y, and Z. It means that every day you have a routine that benefits your day. So my morning routine, is truly making an iced coffee with no phone and either sitting on my couch or on in my yard or balcony. Sometimes it's on the beach. I'm very fortunate. I live in New York City, but I'm just 2 blocks from the beach. And it's really going through three lists, right? It's my to-do list, my check-in list. So I have like an internal CRM of things that are sometimes business related, sometimes not, birthdays, anything that I want to check in on those people. And then the third list are just some like actionable goals for the week. So those three lists are something that I review almost daily. I put it in list form because it allows me to kind of see the week, what I'm accomplishing, and like not neglecting the people that I care about, right? So I'm always kind of checking in with past clients or making sure I'm wishing, you know, a loved one a happy birthday, but still kind of taking that time and just sipping my coffee and looking at not what I have to accomplish that day, but really like if I didn't do these three lists, like I would feel like I failed, right? Like I would feel like, oh, I'm not being a good friend or I'm not being a good sister, or I'm not going after my next goal, and so on. So those three lists kind of navigate my morning, and then I get into my work routine of like, okay, I have meetings, I have clients, I have events, all the regular stuff. But that really allowed me to realize like you're a human first, right? And having that practice was the first thing. Two other things I do, I definitely incorporate exercise into my life. Sometimes that could just be listening to a meditation on a walk or listening to a podcast, really being mindful in that. And then the third is not always doing it alone. So I'm really fortunate that I joined a very supportive run club. And I've been able to take an active part of our meetups and cheer for my teammates when they're in races and so on. Because what I've learned in those mindful practices and having that in the tool belt is I would get lonely, right? I was doing all of these things for myself, but it felt so isolated. So having that third component of being a part of a team and surrounding myself with people that are interesting and have different interests and, are equally in it for the health benefits as it is for the community, allowed me to kind of conquer all three of what I was looking for in a mindful practice.
Wow. I love that. And I think what's so cool about it is that they're all, in many ways, kind of like activating different parts of what we all need to feel good. Which, in addition to obviously like the movement with exercise and getting outside as a result of that, and, relationships that you don't always do it alone, you've also got kind of this inner work and this practice that you do every morning. I'm curious, like, if I'm listening to you and I was you like 10 years ago, what would you have said? And how would you convince yourself that something like this is meaningful? And what would be a first step to start to build some of these practices into your life?
Yeah, I think the first um, thing is like old Kelly Parker couldn't believe that, this would be something I could accomplish, right? For the majority of my life, I didn't take care of myself in those ways. And I, like I said, like everything from my eating to my sleeping to drinking and partying, all of that was just such a part of my life. And, as you get older, it dwindles down, but I never thought it would swing the pendulum so far that I, run marathons now. But I would say, those things that are really important is I did prioritize, um, you know, I did prioritize myself in many ways during that time, but I would also just take it one step further and say, prioritize building the right relationships, right? Because I had worked for so many leaders and been in startups, and I wasn't looking east to west of learning from peers as much. And I wasn't looking at other companies. I was just really internalized and not looking at, like, when I was at, Managed by Q, it was a startup, right? And I was just so ingrained in what we were selling, what we were doing. And I wasn't looking at what other companies are doing or what the next steps are. So that's something was a missed kind of opportunity for me of building a community in that, of other startups and other people and any type of community that was outside of uh the friends that I grew up with, right? So that would probably be my biggest regret of living in the city, was just of being in my 20s during that time and prioritizing partying over community and like actual impactful business relationships and friendships.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. And I think one of my follow-up questions to you is like, what came first? And I know this might feel silly that I'm asking so many specifics, but like, yeah, I feel like for me, I'm always curious, like, what was the thing that like almost like tipped you into the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing to start to like build this like very full and beautiful practice?
Yeah, so unfortunately for me, I was diagnosed with a incurable condition that I've actually had my whole life. And I think now looking back on my practice and everything I know now, both like spiritually, mentally, physically, and, emotionally, even mindfully, like all of those things that it incorporated having this condition. But I was really gaslit from medical doctors, like from the time I was 10 up until I was 30. And I have a condition called endometriosis, and it's a women's health condition. And I've talked about it a lot because it's directly impacted all of my relationships and my career. But I've had 7 surgeries from it. And during the time I
Oh
was
my
in
God.
pain before all those surgeries, I just ignored it because every doctor kind of gave me the runaround and didn't believe me and just told me this is part of women's health. So I felt like I was using outside tools to kind of cope, right? Like I think I was partying more or, sleeping for days at a time and not taking care of it because there was no answers. And then what triggered this complete kind of lifestyle journey of adding mindfulness into my practice and, utilizing exercise and all of these things probably happened when I was like 29 or 30. I started with that, and then it just continued to grow into, um, you know, part of my identity. But I would say that the one kicker for me was definitely getting a diagnosis and having to go for surgery. Once that happened, it was like I signed up for my first half marathon. I couldn't run a mile at that time, but I was like, okay, I need these big goals to keep going. And then all the little goals followed, right?
Totally. And I can relate to that a whole lot. I'm a runner as well. And I always say you can't, run 10 miles without running five, and you can't run five without taking a step. So running is such a cool metaphor, and also very cool that it was kind of the anchor for you in so many of these changes. I'm also really sorry to hear about the endometriosis. That I can only imagine how hard that diagnosis was, because I consistently hear that it takes years and years and years. I am curious. I'm going to pause there just in case anybody actually is listening and maybe is, struggling with symptoms or anything like that. Is there any advice that you would give or thoughts that they should keep in mind if they're, dealing with a diagnosis and trying to figure out what's next for them?
Yeah, I mean, now,
Knowing you're not a doctor, I should say,
right.
but just
Yeah,
somebody who's kind of
absolutely.
been
So
wildly educated.
I was going to actually say that right away was, I can't provide any medical advice and I could only share my own story. But what has been the biggest and most helpful resource is finding accounts on Instagram and TikTok and social media of not just medical professionals and physicians, but also organizations of people that provide resources of how to conduct a conversation with your doctor, right? Or how to, we're not telling anyone to WebMD and self diagnose or anything like that, but how to really track your symptoms so that there is a way to, express them to a medical professional. Because unfortunately, with this disease, in order to get a diagnosis, you have to do exploratory surgery. Um, there are other things of testing and so on that they're working on, but a true diagnosis only comes from surgery. And of course, no one is going to volunteer surgery unless they truly think that there is a need. So, my recommendation is there are a lot of communities online, there's a lot of great resources, and to start tracking any of those symptoms so that you can have a more productive conversation with your provider.
Amazing. Thank you, Kelly. That's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Now, a couple kind of quick questions I always ask folks before we wrap up. I'm going to do an extra bonus one for you, just based on this wonderful conversation. So, first question is, what is your favorite book, podcast, person you follow who talks about any of these mental fitness related topics?
Sure. My number one and my most recommended is Give and Take by Adam Grant. I am such a big believer that your success in business and life really comes from providing first. And I think that's exactly how our relationship has started, right? Of like an introduction and, checking in on each other and making additional introductions and so on. And I think that's truly the basis of how you do business, how you conduct relationships. And Adam, who is an organizational psychologist and, has been a Penn or Wharton, and he has spoken on so many different topics. I think he does such a good job of explaining the art and science of giving and taking. So that's my number one rec.
That's so good. And I'm actually glad you shared that because I remember earlier on you had said, yeah, so much of the journey is about making sure that you're giving back, which is amazing, which is actually my next follow-up question. Which is if someone is thinking like, wow, okay, I have some capacity, or maybe I don't have capacity, but I need to be giving a little more in my life. Do you have any suggestions about ways that they could be doing that, big or small?
Sure. I I know that time commitments are really hard to incorporate in a practice, especially as a founder. I do simple things, right? My calendar is public, so anyone who wants to, talk to me about entrepreneurship or, learn more about what I do, they could sign up for a 15-minute call. That's something that's always going to be there. So things like that, you could do that in your practice or business, right? Open up time slots on your calendar to make it available. The other thing that I do pretty regularly is volunteer at local organizations that have open time slots. One great one in New York is God's Love We Deliver. So they you could actually work in their kitchen for the day, and they have
Cool.
spots available based on your calendar, right? And I think if you're not great in the kitchen, there's driving options, there's, delivering food. Like there's so many different ways to volunteer, but I do love organizations that are geared towards business professionals that allow that because a lot of us have busy schedules. And the last one I would always say is every community in the country has an annual 5K, probably even a local 5K once a month. And if you want to see the most, you want to be inspired and see the most amazing people in the world, they're, runners, walkers, people doing something for a cause, and just handing out water or cheering when you can really makes all the difference. So um, that's my plug for volunteering at your local run. It really is absolutely incredibly amazing to see everyone's stories come to life and get that medal at a finish line.
That's so cool. I love that. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times when you hear the word volunteer or help, like you think more traditional soup kitchens, which are so fabulous. And there's all these ways you can get creative, to your point, to help other people achieve their goals. And it all counts in the best of ways. So thank you for those, Kelly. Okay, my next question. What is a quote or piece of advice that you have been living by lately?
Um, sure. So I think given that I sold my company into a flower business, I always say no rain, no flowers. I
Oh,
think
I love
flowers,
that.
yeah, flowers are absolutely beautiful, and they bring people so much joy and so much comfort in times of grief and celebration. And what people don't see is that, in order for flowers to grow, they need a safe environment and sunlight and lots of rain and water. So, whatever you're going through, like there's flowers at the end because that's how they grow, right? Like you get this beautiful product from going through like those storms. So that's something that I keep close to, my heart when I'm thinking about tough times in life or entrepreneurship is no rain, no flowers.
I've never heard that before, and I really, really, really appreciate it. Yeah, I feel like sometimes we only look at the flower, and to your point, we forget about everything that goes into making it. And for all you entrepreneurs out there who are thinking like, but it's thunderstorming, and it's been thunderstorming for a long time, just think of yourself as a tropical flower, because to your point, there are flowers in the end. Very beautiful. Okay. How can people find you, Kelly? So you mentioned obviously this open calendar. I'm willing to help. How can people read and continue to learn from you?
Sure. So yeah, you could find me at Kellyanne Parker on LinkedIn, and my calendar is linked there. And I post a bunch of content around my stories, ups, downs, trials, errors, mistakes, life lessons through my company B2B KP, which is just business owner to business owner by Kelly Parker, because I coach on the from the point of view of someone who's been there, right? So someone who's launched, grown, and exited a company.
Amazing. Okay. Well, we'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. This has been an absolute pleasure. And we hope to have you back on the show at a later date because I'm sure there's a whole lot that we could dive into, but want to make sure that we can get you helping other entrepreneurs as quickly as possible. So we'll let you go. But Kelly, really, really appreciate your time and your mind.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Awesome.